Hello, everyone. This is Anthony Cheam on the Power, Purpose, and Passion Show. Thank you for joining us today. I have my friend Cam going to help me out with the technological side and asking a multitude of questions on our show. And basically, this is about claiming your power, clarifying your purpose, and cultivating your passions in life. Whatever struggles you're going through, whatever problems or challenges you're going through, we're going to talk about pretty deep stuff and pretty strategic, basic stuff to transform your life on a daily basis. Because what it really comes down to is both strategy and hanging around the people that are going to elevate your life, having a new mindset, changing your mind, changing your heart, opening up your whole soul to the ideas of transformation that it is possible for you and possible for the rest of the world out there. And that's what I do as a life coach, as a speaker, as an author, just to help people cultivate a different level of standard, a different level of emotion, a different level of performance in both their, the 8 dimensions of the life, whether it be their relationships, whether it be their spiritual life, whether it be their health, whether it be their job or career, whatever it is you want to transform. We're going to talk about it here. We're going to talk about some suffering and some pain that you'll go through along the way. Because let's face it, life is hard. And I have my own coaches. I have my own spiritual directors and people that are helping me out. So I'm just doing my part and passing it on to the community and the world abroad. So thank you for joining us today.
Great. So on today's episode, I wanted to ask you about attachment. So a lot of people, in this life, we are attached to almost everything. People, what they think of us, what they do, how they feel. Sometimes we're attached to other people's feelings, and we always want to make sure they're okay, and when they're not, we aren't okay, and their pain is our pain sort of thing. Mm-hmm. We're attached to things, constantly trying to get things, and if we lose it, we're upset, and all these things happen, right? We're attached to... Yeah, but you get the idea. All sorts of things. And so what I wanted to talk about here was, why are we attached to things like this, things and people and what they think and all these things? And how might we transcend that and reach a place where we're finally at peace and we're not totally just trying to sort of that treadmill of chasing after things and being attached and that sort of thing. So how could we sort of get past that?
Well, at the end of the day, a lot of attachment comes out of we think that something, an object outside of us or an opinion of us or a degree on the wall or the $1 million in the bank will define us, that will solidify our identity, that we're attached to happiness, we're attached to joy. In fact, if you look at it from a spiritual point of view, being attached to happiness can cause suffering because no one's ever happy 100% of the time. Right. So the idea is that if we say, oh, I'm happy, I want this to last forever, the moment that it sort of dissolves, you're going to be unhappy. And then you're going to want to chase after. And that's where attachment comes from, ultimately at the most basic form of attachment. But attachment to cars, houses, attachment to even our name, we get attached to. I mean, there's even a Zen Buddhist monk who asked, or it's a Zen Buddhist philosophy that's asked, tell me who you are. Tell me who you were even before your parents were born. And you go, well, who was I? I wasn't even in existence in this physical form. And you go, well, from a divine spiritual point of view, you could say that you are infinite love, an infinite connection with the divine or God or universe or Tao or I amness or Allah, whatever you want to label it as. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is attaching ourselves to the ego, which is, and we talked about this before, Cam, in one of our other kind of talks before about the ego, the six components of the ego. We are what we do. We are what we have. We are what others think of us. We are separate from others. We're separate from God. We're separate from what's missing in our life. So, how much of our life goes into our identity, goes into what we do and what we have. We have $1 million home. Is that who we are? Our job, or we're a doctor, or we're a lawyer, or we're a teacher. Our identity gets so fixated on that sometimes we lose face. Because what about when we retire from those careers? Or what about when we're a healthy person and we're 90 years old and we have all these problems that are going on in our body and we can't perform at the same level? What happens? Who are we then? And so a lot of attachment comes to an idea that life is supposed to be. And that's where, pain and suffering happens. And there's a quote that says, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And in many cases, pain, we can't run away from. It's gonna happen. But the sufferings that happen in our life is this usually about this idea about how life is supposed to be. If we are now 60 or 70 and we're focusing on how life was when we're 30 and 40, and we don't have that life anymore, that's where the suffering comes from. This idea that life is supposed to be like it was when I was 30 or 40, when I was 20 or whatever it was. Life has passed me by, and that's where suffering comes from. And it's a choice we make, whether conscious or conscious. We can immediately shift our mindset from, okay, I had a great time when I was in my 30s or 40s or 20s or 50s. What is the benefit now? What can I do now to experience life at greater depths? I'm stronger, wiser, faster, smarter. What can I do to shift my mindset or upgrade my mindset so I can experience life at the greatest depth possible? So, if you want to know a basic remedy there, Cam, too, basically being more present is a great remedy to attachment. Being present with your negative feelings, being present with your positive feelings, being present with the person you are with, being present just even with this podcast. You and I having this conversation online and being able to stream it on Facebook and being able to serve people and just being focused on this moment now, serving the masses out there at whatever capacity, being present with that, being present with your pain, being present with, your workouts or your yoga or your Tai Chi or whatever spiritual practice, or being present with just sitting. The other day, I went to the beach and I was feeling a bit tired. And I said, you know what? I need to kind of go for a little walk, walking meditation, they call it. And I went by the beach and I sat on a rock for about 15 minutes and just watched the waves. And immediately, as you notice where your mind goes, your mind immediately goes to, oh, I got to go here. I got an appointment at 3:00. Oh, I'm lonely, or I'm bored. This is stupid. What am I doing? And you immediately start to become aware of this monkey mind, it's incessant racket that constantly goes. And if we can learn to sit in the awareness, just be aware of the racket, that alone brings presence. Because awareness is not thinking. Because if you look at it this way, for you, Cam, just watch your thoughts. Just whatever you're thinking about right now, just watch your thoughts. If you're listening in this podcast right now, watch your thoughts. Just sit, whatever thoughts are streaming across your consciousness, just watch them. And you'll notice that you're not your thoughts. You're the person that's viewing or observing your thoughts at a seated position in awareness. That's awareness. You are the seer behind the thinking, or you are the seer behind the scene, or you're the experiencer behind what is being experienced, or the observer about behind what's being observed. So if we can kind of get to a place where we're meditating, and again, it doesn't have to be a formal meditation. It could just be just sitting at your desk, taking a few deep breaths, focusing on your breathing, being detached from the moment, and this idea of how life is supposed to be based on our blueprint or our egoic patterns, whatever it might be, but just taking time to be more present. And I found that to probably be the best remedy to detaching ourselves from how life is supposed to be based on this egoic belief that we're supposed to be happy all the time or whatever it might be.
So, yeah, no, that's great. I love that. Especially since I've noticed that just by being present with that attachment, there's a part of you that I think is like that higher self that is just like, this isn't right. This isn't who I am. This isn't what I came here to do, right? Mm-hmm, and then you get back on track. A thing that I did, which is kind of funny, I think I don't know if I said this in the last episode, because I actually mentioned this a lot because it blew me away. I was staring at myself in the mirror, and I just sort of like, that it became a meditation, just like making eye contact with myself. Yeah. And then I thought, like, who is this? Who, like I was brought here, and I have, it just, like, the one thing that was going through my mind is, I was brought here, and I have an unbelievable amount of opportunities. Mm-hmm. I have 24 hours every single day. I've got 365 days in every year, and, like, the possibilities are endless, right? Mm-hmm. And it blew me away, just like that one moment of just being present and being with myself. And transcending that monkey mind, like you said.
Yeah, you got it. And the thing is too, Cam, I like, for one of my favorite practices that I do, is as simple as it sounds, is just sitting, focusing on your breathing, but then noticing the moment you notice your brain or your mind going into its incessant racket and pattern, 60,000 thoughts a day, and going towards the first thing that you find yourself attaching yourself to the joy of this moment, the peacefulness of this moment. Even being attached to peace, that can create something, because you're like, oh, I have to have this peace. I have to, and then when it goes away, you're stressing about it. So ultimately, here's what I want people to understand: when you find yourself attaching to a certain idea in your mind, here's what I want you to do: just simply watch it and notice your inclination to attach yourself to how things are supposed to be. That alone creates sort of the void between making a conscious choice from a place of depth and awareness to just a knee-jerk reaction and making it better, or running away from how painful it is, or running towards the pleasure because you want to run away from the pain. Whatever it might be, notice your inclination to want to attach to to that pleasure, and also too, notice your aversion to want to make things different. Like when you feel the pain of, I don't know, you just lost your job, or you just lost, you lost your girlfriend or your boyfriend, or things aren't going well in your life, whatever, for whatever reason. And you're in that moment and you notice the inclination to want to step away from the pain, to not deal with the pain, to distract yourself with food or alcohol or whatever it might be, or going for a walk and not dealing with your pain. Just sitting with the attachment, just noticing the attachment, noticing the aversion, noticing this idea that, okay, I have to have life in a certain way based on my blueprint or whatever it might be. Just noticing it immediately detaches yourself from that, because you're being aware of the pattern, and awareness alone can break the pattern, can create that space for you to make a greater decision in that moment, and just being present with it. So many people have a tough time just being present with, like, when you get bored. I have this pattern too. When I get bored, I have to feel like I have this egoic pattern that says I got to be doing something. I don't want to be bored. But then I've learned to just sit in that boredom and be okay with the boredom for a little while. And it creates that space. It creates that peace. It creates that sort of semblance of bliss in my life where I can go, I'm okay just sitting here. I don't have to do anything. I can just be in this moment as I am with myself, accepting the moment as it is. And the more you're able to do that, the less attached you'll be to happiness. Because the thing is, the reality is, your level of happiness is usually directly measured by your level of unhappiness. Can you live in the middle where you're okay with being unhappy for a little while and be okay with being happy, but not being attached to both outcomes? And I think that's probably what we're going to segue into next, is the idea of being attached to an outcome. Wayne Dyer used to say that purpose is greater than outcome. And that was a subtitle in my latest book, U 2.0. And purpose is greater than outcome. And why is purpose greater than outcome? Is because if you're focused on the outcome so much, then it dissipates your power to focus on the present moment. So as an example, Deepak Chopra talked about how basic example of studying. If you're studying for an exam and you're focused, I got to get an A, that alone, you're so attached to the outcome, dissipates your ability to be present with what's necessary to get the A, which is to study. So in Cameron, if you're focused on, I want to blow people away with my music, and you're like, I have to have an outcome. That'll dissipate your ability to be present with the actual song that you're doing now in the moment. And you've probably had the experience where you just kind of let go, you're in the moment, and all of a sudden your arms just take over when you're drumming or you're singing or whatever you're doing. And you almost feel like you're a witness to the talent being brought forth from your body. Right. So, there's a level of detachment. There's a level of presence. There's a level of acceptance. We could talk hours and days about this stuff. We can go from, in many different angles and apply it to many different areas of your life.
Yeah. So as always, Cheam just goes off on a big rant. I love it though. I took some notes here. And I was just writing, like, there's obviously different kinds of attachments. I wrote attachments to feelings, to people, to things, and to outcome. I'm not sure if there's any more, but I wanted to say a quote that I heard of, and I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know if this came from Wayne Dyer or somebody he knew or something. You probably heard it. And I'm paraphrasing because it's been a while. But he said something along the lines of depression or suffering comes from wanting happiness and peace and expecting it to come from a certain place. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, here's the thing. That alone will create suffering and pain too, Because if your expectation is I have to live happy all the time, you're going to live in suffering, because no one lives happy all the time.
Yeah.
It's not possible living. In fact, I think it would be, the person that says, I'm always positive. I have to be positive. I'm fearful of I'm afraid of having a negative thought. Well, isn't being afraid of having a negative thought? So it's not this idea of being positive and happy all the time, or being negative or sad all the time. It's being able to honor each experience, because if you're on a deep spiritual journey, the reality is, Cam, you embody and accept and experience the full spectrum of the human condition, meaning you basically, I wouldn't say suffer through, but you accept the moment as it is, whether you're bored or happy or sad or loving or whatever it might be. You accept it as it is. That doesn't mean you stay there, but you're aware of your sadness. You're aware of the trigger of why you're sad. It could be of why you're sad. And then your brain goes into its monkey mind again. You just keep on going, but why are you sad? You should be happy. And you see this fighting going on within you, instead of just sitting in that awareness of going, I'm just going to sit here. And, we talked about this before, about sitting in that liminal space, between the times you've just exited a door. Let's say you've just lost your job, and you've entered the hallway of that liminal space between the time you've just left a job or been fired from a job to the time you haven't quite found a job. That's liminal space. Richard Rohr calls it the liminal space. Then you basically lost a job, or you've lost a relationship, you broke up, and you haven't quite found the door to the next relationship or the next job or whatever it might be. You will grow, and please take this at heart. You will grow the most in that liminal space. But the immediate egoic knee-jerk reaction of most human beings is to what? Lose a job, immediately go to find a new job. And you know what? And that could very well be a healthy response, because you got to pay your bills and so on and so forth. But you're not dealing with the pain in the moment, or the loss of a relationship that's broke up, and you immediately jump from one relationship to another. I often say to people, if you leave a relationship, you bring you everywhere you go. So unless you deal with your own stuff, you're going to bring the same baggage everywhere into every relationship, into every job, into every known, experience that there is to experience. So, what I want you to get is that the idea, it's okay to feel the pain. It's okay to feel that you're bored or lonely or you're sad, and detach from that by just being present with it. And trust me when I say this, the suffering and the pain that you experience never lasts forever. The Buddhists talk about the law of impermanence. Happiness is impermanent, and so is sadness is impermanent. Joy is impermanent, and so is suffering is impermanent. So you got to allow yourself the room to feel these feelings, to understand the feelings, to be okay with the feelings, and to own those feelings too. And that's ultimately how you claim your power from a multi-dimensional approach. Because if you only claim the positive and you basically negate the negative, you're negating a lot of dark experiences. Because as you get closer to the light, the more the light reveals your darkness.
Absolutely. Another thing I'm realizing is it's sort of like the choice between chasing happiness all the time and making happiness your purpose of life, which is unrealistic, as we talked about. Yes. Happiness being the purpose of life will mean that your entire life you're going to be happy, what, like 70% of the time, if you're doing well, right? And so 30% of the time you're not living your purpose, you're just wasting your life away, that sort of thing, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the choice between chasing happiness or being at peace with what comes.
Yes,
which
very
is
good. Very good.
Which is so comforting, dude. Like, just the idea of sitting back and feeling like no matter what life tries to do to me, like, it's fine. Like, I'll feel something, which is cool and all, whatever, but I'm okay with it. There's no fear, there's no resistance, there's no whatever. And, I think in Zen there's a quote, and it says, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Mm-hmm. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Which basically means that before enlightenment, you did these tasks, you lived your life, and you had resistance towards it. You're always like, I don't want to do this. This is upsetting. This is painful. This is exhausting. And then after enlightenment, or this shift in thinking, really is what it is, you are doing the same things, but there is no resistance. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed the only thing that creates suffering is that resistance from what is happening. Because because something can hurt, or something can be really painful or upsetting. But unless you are consciously sitting there and like saying to yourself, "Oh, I can't believe this is happening. I don't want this to happen. This hurts. This is not comfortable." Blah blah blah. And you just kind of like the monkey mind goes, but in that negative spiral, and that's what creates that like suffering. That like like this hurts even more. It's like when you wallow in your sadness rather than be present in your sadness.
With it, you know what? There's even a psychological sort of term or process they call this, where the moment you notice a negative pattern or a negative feeling enter your psyche, what essentially happens is within the first 10, 15, 20 seconds, your brain will basically harden that feeling into a storyline. You ever notice that you have a negative feeling and then your brain goes to validate it, to justify the feeling, and then it goes into a storyline about it. And then as soon as you go into a storyline and harden it with the storyline, guess what happens? It amplifies the feeling like 4 times. It quadruples the negative feeling. And then you're already hooked. You're already trapped. Rather than just going, oh, there's some resistance. There's my negative feeling. There's my, there it goes again. There goes my ego again, and noticing it and laughing at it and going, oh, there it goes again. Noticing it, watching it, breathing through it, being present with it, noticing where the pain in your body is. Where is the loneliness in your body? Just being aware of that. Where's the tightness in your throat? Is it in your chest? Is it in your legs? Is it in your feet? Is it in your brain? And just being aware of the subtle sort of symptoms that those feelings give you, noticing that and breathing through that, the less attached you'll be to that. And you said one word, resistance, which was so vital, that the more you become non-resistant to the moment, the more you realize, paradoxically, you are resistant, right? You start to go, oh my gosh, I'm resisting the moment. I'm doing my best to not resist the moment. The more you realize your ego's fighting so badly to control it, and even more, and fight and battle with you even more. So the more non-resistant you become, the more layers you kind of uncover, the more resistant, the ego becomes, because it's slowly dying away.
Yeah, and the tricky thing about ego and how it's like a voice in your head is it really tries to sound like you. Like it really it's weird, because I mean I'm watching a lot of spiritual teachers, and a lot of them talk about how just the idea of being a person in a world, like this separate being that is inside of something and everything else is separate, and it's sort of like I'm in this, creates that separation. It creates a space where you have less control over everything, right? And what the ego tries to do is it tries to bring you back to being a person, being like a separate entity from everybody else. It tries, and it's so weird how, like, it does this with meditation all the time. It'll tell you, it'll be like, I don't want to meditate right now. Like, what? Why would I want to sit down? Like, that doesn't sound very fun to me.
You know what? What's amazing? There's a great book called The Untethered Soul, which is a great book. It's an amazing book. And here's a great practice to kind of detach yourself from the identity with the ego. Imagine you're at a park bench, and your ego is sitting at the park bench with you, and you're sitting with the ego, sitting in front of with the ego, and the ego's sitting on the park bench, and you have a park bench in front of, and the ego's in front of you, and all of a sudden you go, all right, ego, talk. And it just goes blah, 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 blah. And you're just sitting, listening to what it has to say, going 1,000 miles per hour, going like I talk, and you're going crazy, crazy, crazy. And you're just listening to the ego, go, stress, fear, whatever, angst, suffering, pain, happiness. You have to do this. You have to do that. Why are you doing this? You should, and just listening, and just notice this sort of liberation, this freedom from the ego itself, just going, wow, I'm listening to this ego talk as if it's a person, or the inner cynic, or whatever you want to call it, and just blurb out verbal diarrhea, and you're just listening without judgment, and you're just listening. You're going, wow, okay, like a kind and trustworthy therapist. You're just listening. Okay, continue. And eventually, there's a point where there's a space where you just kind of go, wow, this is pretty silly, that I'm actually identifying myself with this ego that constantly has to talk and judge and criticize and condemn, has no compassion whatsoever for thyself or for the world. And as you said, this sense of separateness from others. I often say to people, listen, if you're separate from others, here's what I suggest you do. Hold your breath for 10 minutes. And let's see how separate you are from your environment from other people. I mean, Deepak Chopra said, every breath we take we inhale as a 10 to the power of 10 atoms. And every time we exhale 10 to the power of 10 atoms. And at any moment in time, every human being has within them 1 million atoms that existed in the body of Christ, or Genghis Khan, or Buddha, or Mother Teresa, or whomever. We're all connected. And there's that story, I heard about Albert Einstein says we're all connected. He says, the day that the bees leave this earth, within 4 years, all life will cease to exist. No bees, there's no plants, right? No plants, there's no animals. And you basically, you go down from there. So we're all connected. We're all connected at some level. And one of the greatest stories I heard was when St. Francis was walking across the street and he saw this worm squiggling, and he decided to pick it up and put it to the side of the road and not step on it. And to know that he has compassion and love for all sentient beings, regardless of race, color, sex, or creed, or whether it's a plant or an animal. It really doesn't matter. So, I mean, we're going off on a tangent right now, but the idea is, we're spiritual beings having a human experience, not a human being having a spiritual experience. Because the essence of who we are. I mean, watching my father die, when the soul of my father left his body, that wasn't my dad. That meat suit wasn't my father. The essence of my father wasn't this human body. And it's like, Maxwell Maltz talked about in his book, Psycho-Cybernetics. He talks about how, defining a human being as the human body is like defining electricity as the wire through which it passes. It's not the wire. We're the essence or the embodiment of the divine that occupies different bodies every moment, right? And that to me might be an esoteric or out of this world identity or definition of human beings, but it gives me a sense of, wow, we're more than just these bodies, and we're expressions and instruments of divine love.
Absolutely. And I guess I just want to preface to the entire audience, because a lot of people, they think of these spiritual concepts and they're like, I don't need that. I'm fine, I'm living my life, there's ups and downs, but I'm okay. I've got it. But I think it's hard to explain. It's almost like ego is real easy, but following a spiritual path is like you're having to actually face things that you have to stop distracting yourself for once. And that's what blew me away, because at first I had a big initial high of wow, that's what this is. This is awakening. This is enlightenment. This is so fun, so great. This feels great. And I feel safe. I feel like I have all the answers. This is lovely. And then I was hit with reality, which is you have to face everything, the good and the bad, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't, the thing is if you only face the good, then the bad will sneak up on you somehow, eventually, right? It's almost like, if I want to go get some sunlight, I have to be, outside in the air, there's a give and take, basically. But I think, if you keep distracting yourself, because that's what most people do, they just kind of get by comfortably.
Yeah.
There's no almost seems like there's no excitement in life. There's no purpose anymore. The purpose is just to be comfortable. There's no depth.
There's no depth. And I think I think what you're alluding to there, Cameron, is this idea that I think Rumi had a quote that said, he said this, I think it was something like along the lines, and again, I'm paraphrasing too here. He says something like, I drank a cup of sorrow, and joy replied, something like, wow, isn't that sweet? And then sorrow replied saying, you caught me. How can I sell sorrow when you know it's a blessing? And it's the idea that, our sorrow can turn into joy pretty quickly, and our joy can turn into sorrow pretty quick. And living in between, the middle path, as Buddha calls it, and understanding that, too much happiness could lead to frequent frustration, and too much sorrow can lead to, depression, and it can lead you to the right opportunities too. But as you said, don't deny it. And there's also a quote that says, anything suppressed will be expressed in later days in uglier ways. So if you suppress those emotions, if you suppress and deny and disassociate from certain emotions or experiences, it will be expressed in later days, magnified and amplified. And it's oftentimes people ask me, oh, how, you're on the spiritual journey. What is it like? And I give them the honest answer. I'll say, yes, there's joy. Yes, there's happiness, but I have to say it is hard. That's what I think what the Bible is saying is like, straight and narrow is the gate and very few people walk it, because it is narrow. It is hard to face your stuff. It is tough. Life is hard. And so that's why, as you said, people distract themselves with TV, and don't get me wrong, those things can be, vital for relaxation and entertainment. I get it. But if you're using it as a way to distract yourself from what's really going on, and as I talk about living life with great depth, like for me, I've had to face a lot of my own addictions, my own problems, my own challenges, my own relationships, my own, inner child, my own inner demons, and facing those wasn't easy. I often say to people, if you're truly on a spiritual journey, and Marianne Williamson, kind of said this too, if you're on a spiritual journey, a real spiritual journey where you're facing your own stuff, it's almost like God puts a magnifying glass on you, on all the times you've made it bad. But here's the thing. If you don't pinpoint where you did it wrong, where are you going to get the motivation to finally do it right, as she says? And the reality is that if we don't face the dirt, if we don't face the crap in our life, we're not going to have that deep level of appreciation when things do go right, and that deep level of peace and energy to and that deep level of compassion. Because for me, all the challenges I've been through, actually, I apply it to a lot of my clients that I coach, and because I've went through some pretty tough times in my life, I'm able to have greater compassion for my understanding at a deep level of other people's suffering and go, wow, I went through a similar thing like you did. It wasn't easy for me either. I went through XYZ and I felt this way, and I've gone through, and here's how I dealt with it. And here's how I feel this could be a great strategy for you to kind of climb yourself out of the depths of your sorrow and your suffering. But the reality is, sort of the paradox is there, Cameron, is to transcend suffering, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, you have to go to the center of your suffering. That's the sort of the paradox. And that sort of begins the process of transcending your suffering and your pain and all the challenges in your life is facing them, as you said, not denying them. And you'll come out more compassionate, more loving, and you'll be more happy. That's certainly an experience in my life too, as well.
Yeah. And I feel like, here I am 19 saying this, but I feel like later on in life you might have a lot less regrets, right? Because a lot of people, they spend their lives distracting themselves, and so their life just zooms on by, and they ask the question like, wow, like what could my life have been like if I didn't just sit around and distract myself from my pain all the time? And I mean, I think Buddha said, life itself is suffering. Just being born is suffering, because you're gonna fall, you're gonna get sad, people are gonna leave you, people are gonna make fun of you. It's just like life in general is just that sort of thing. And this whole podcast has sort of sounded half pessimistic in a way, because we've been just talking about like the crap that you could go through. But it's all like who's gonna talk about it? It's not a pretty thing to talk about. It's not a fun thing to talk about for the most part. For sure. But once it's actually cleared up and we understand it, you're just the whole way of like how you could deal with it and how you get through it comfortably and peacefully is like you're just better at that. Like the idea of learning in general. If you were to spend an hour a day learning the benefits of exercise, and you just sat there and just learned it, whether you like it or not, you're going to start exercising maybe just a little bit every day, right? Just because you're just learning more, and it just affects the way you see the world. And so if we're sitting here and we're being honest with ourselves about all the bad things and the good things and the balance between those two, we can't help but see it as a blessing, like you said. Everything that is like sort of what most people would say bad and painful in my life, I see it as a blessing. Absolutely. Yes. And I wanted to talk about that in the next episode, balance, like you said, that middle
Yes.
path. Because
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's constantly trying to like get through that middle path, right? Because like it's a winding road almost.
Yes. Yeah. You
But
got it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and the idea of learning, but then unlearning, and
Yes. Yeah.
learning and then messing up again, and then
Yeah.
sort of that idea of just like that middle path, and getting through that without beating yourself up all the time, or
Sure.
like getting too far off on the deep end or too
Sure.
far off on the other end, right? Sort
Sure.
of
Sure.
finding that place.
Yeah. Well, I think you made a good point there, Cam. I think the reality is that a lot of people think the positive psychology movement or the new age movement, it's all about being positive, be positive and things will happen. The Secret, when it came out, 10, 15 years ago, it was a very positive thing. But here's the thing. I'm a big believer that until I was able to face a lot of my dark places, there was no sort of, if you deny some of those dark places, you don't live a whole deep and powerful, enlightened life. Jesus suffered on the cross. Buddha suffered through, living with the ascetics and living 1 grain of rice a day and going through all these crazy things. And a lot of spiritual people do go through some very, very harmful and unimaginable pains in their life, but they come out with greater peace and depth and love and compassion for the world. I mean, the great story was Buddha when he was dying in his 80s. The story was the cook accidentally poisoned his food. And one of his disciples told him, he said, I'm going to tell the cook that he poisoned the Buddha's food. And the Buddha looked at him and he said, do you honestly think that's going to make him feel better? If the cook knew he killed the Buddha, right? That wouldn't make him feel good. So he said, here's what I want you to say to him. I want you to go up to him and say, what is better, to prepare a meal lovingly that nourishes the Buddha, or to prepare a meal lovingly for the Buddha that leads the Buddha to his final liberation? That's what I want you to tell him. And it blew my mind going, that's a higher level of consciousness. He wasn't focusing on, oh, you're killing me, or you shouldn't have done that, you brutal person. He had a deep level of compassion saying, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's fine. It's all right. I'm going to live with love and compassion. And he died with that mindset. And same thing with Jesus, he's on the cross and he's saying, forgive them for they know not what they do. Right. And you're going to his executioners. Could you imagine sitting on the cross? Your friends have left you. Everyone's betrayed you. They're executing you because you're claiming, to be God for whatever reason, different interpretations of that. And he's saying, I forgive you. Wow. That's a different level of human being. And to me, as we, cap off this podcast, I think, there's three sort of components to spirituality. I think, and I cover this in my book briefly as well. And the first component is what we've been talking about, cleaning up all your crap, or acclaiming all your crap, looking at your dark places. The second part is growing up along the levels of development they call, and going from an ego to ethnocentric to world-centric and cosmocentric. And as you grow on those levels, and I won't get into right now, it's something called spiral dynamics. Ken Wilber talks about it a lot. And there's another thing called waking up, as you use the word enlightenment, and being one with the universe and being one with all sentient beings and the universe around you. But again, we won't get into that today. But I think the point is that we've got to accept the good, we got to accept the bad, and sort of put ourselves in a place where we're non-resistant. And I said this to a client the other day. They asked me, what is meditation or in prayer? I said, and I got this from this guy named James Finley. He's a phenomenal spiritual teacher. And he said, meditation is a daily rendezvous with the divine where your only agenda is love. A daily rendezvous with the divine with the only agenda being love. And one of his meditations he sort of professes to a lot of people is sitting in that awareness, allowing love to kind of come into your life or into your being, and just saying the words, I love you, 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 to every person, to every thought, to every bad place in you, the good places, bad places, the child in you, the enemy in you, the forbidden lust in you, the unconditional lover in you, and just professing I love you and repeating it for 10 minutes. And you wouldn't believe how good you feel after saying I love you for 10 minutes in that place of peace. And it's in those places you will transcend a lot of your dark places, because you've then entered into a lot of your dark places.
Wonderful, wonderful. So this has been a action-packed episode so far.
Yeah.
What are your last words on the whole topic of attachment? Attachment of feelings, people, things, outcome. Attachment to like I said, yeah, feelings, like wanting to feel happiness all the time, and if you're not, or being afraid of thinking negative, which is a
Yeah.
negative thought, and all these things. What are your last thoughts? And if you had to say one thing for people to do, once they are finished listening, what would you say that is?
Practice being present. I think the ego cannot be present. It's not possible for the mind, the logical, rational mind, could process the present moment. It can only kind of process the past and look toward the future. That's the ego can't live in the present moment. So practice, mindful breathing. Practice Thich Nhat Hanh's walking meditation, where I did this the other day, where I went to the beach and I slowly took my right foot off the earth and then slowly stepped forward. And I wasn't focusing on the outcome or the destination or going anywhere. Just, wow, what is this right step? I'm taking this right step, and the energy it takes for me to take that right step, and then taking the left step slowly and mindfully, and then being mindful of the present moment daily. And the more you do that, I believe you're going to grow, you're going to wake up, you're going to appreciate, you're going to live with much more joy, and accept the moment for as it is. And I think you'll let love into your life, and you'll be a greater instrument of love as well.